My name is Janet, and I'm 32 years old. I work 2 jobs just to keep my head above water, but every Sunday I drag myself to my parents' house for family dinner. Last week, I was bone tired from pulling a double shift at the diner and then cleaning offices until 3 in the morning. But there I was, sitting at that familiar dining table, hoping maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, they'd see me as more than just the family disappointment. I had no idea that everything was about to change forever. Before we dive into what happened that changed my life completely, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you think twice about family dynamics. Walking up to my childhood home always made me feel small again. The white picket fence, the perfectly manicured lawn, the American flag hanging by the front door. Everything looked exactly the same as it did when I was 8 years old, except now I was the one struggling to make ends meet while everyone else seemed to have it all figured out. My brother Kenneth's BMW was already in the driveway next to my sister Beverly's brand new Lexus. I parked my beat-up Honda Civic behind them, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. Kenneth was 34, 2 years older than me, and he'd just made partner at his law firm downtown. Beverly was 29 and already head of pediatrics at the local hospital. Then there was me, Janet, the middle child who never quite measured up. See, I was supposed to go to college too. Had a full scholarship to State University, was going to study business administration. But during my senior year of high school, Grandma Rose got sick. Really sick. Alzheimer's hit her hard and fast, and someone needed to take care of her. Mom and Dad were both working, Kenneth was in law school, and Beverly was pre-med. Guess who volunteered to put her dreams on hold? I spent 4 years caring for Grandma Rose instead of sitting in lecture halls. Changed her diapers, fed her when she forgot how to use a fork, held her hand during the bad days when she didn't recognize any of us. I used my college fund for her medical expenses, physical therapy, and round-the-clock care when things got really bad. When she passed away, I was 22 with no degree, no prospects, and a family that somehow forgot to say thank you. That's when I started waitressing at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. The pay was terrible, but the tips helped, and I could pick up extra shifts. A few years later, I got pregnant with Emma. Her father disappeared the minute he heard the news, leaving me to figure out single motherhood on my own. I added a night cleaning job to make ends meet, working from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. scrubbing floors in office buildings downtown. Emma is 8 now, and she's the light of my life. Straight A student, sweet as pie and wise beyond her years. She knows Mommy works hard, and she never complains when I'm tired or when we eat mac and cheese for the 3rd night in a row. But sitting in my parents' driveway, I wondered what kind of example I was setting for her. Was I teaching her that it's okay to be invisible in your own family? Dad opened the front door before I could knock, his gray hair perfectly combed and his button-down shirt crisp as always. Harold Peterson had been an accountant for 40 years before retiring, and he still dressed like he was heading to the office every single day. "Janet, you're 10 minutes late," he said instead of hello. "Your mother's been keeping dinner warm." "Sorry, Dad. Had to pick up Emma from her friend's house." He grunted and walked back toward the dining room. I followed him through the living room, past all the family photos on the mantel. Kenneth's law school graduation, Beverly's medical school ceremony, their wedding photos, pictures of their kids. There were a few pictures of Emma and me tucked in the back, but they were from years ago. Mom Doris was bustling around the kitchen in her floral apron, the same one she'd worn for Sunday dinners since I was a kid. She gave me a quick hug that smelled like pot roast and vanilla perfume. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" she asked, but she was already turning back to the stove before I could answer. Kenneth was sitting at the dining table scrolling through his phone while his wife Sandra fed their 2-year-old son. He looked up long enough to nod in my direction. "Janet, how's the waitressing business?" I could hear the condescension in his voice, but I forced a smile. "It's honest work." Beverly breezed in from the living room, still in her scrubs from her shift at the hospital. She looked effortlessly put together, even after a 12-hour day, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Sorry I'm late, everyone. We had an emergency surgery that ran long. You know how it is when you're saving lives. She hugged Mom and Dad, kissed Kenneth on the cheek, then turned to me with that bright professional smile she probably used with patients' families. Janet, how's little Emma still getting good grades? She made honor roll again, I said, trying to inject some pride into my voice. That's wonderful, Beverly said, but she was already moving on, pulling out her phone to show Mom pictures from her recent vacation to Italy with her husband. This was how it always went. Kenneth and Beverly commanded the room with their success stories, while I sat quietly contributing nothing of value to the conversation. They talked about stock options and medical conferences, while I calculated whether I could afford new shoes for Emma before school started. Dad carved the roast while Mom served up mashed potatoes and green beans. We sat around the same table where I'd eaten thousands of meals, but somehow I felt like a stranger. Emma was at her friend's house for a sleepover, which meant I was flying solo tonight. Sometimes her presence made these dinners bearable, because watching my family interact with her reminded me why I kept showing up. So, Kenneth, Dad said, settling into his chair at the head of the table, tell us about this partner situation. I want to hear all the details. Kenneth straightened up, clearly pleased to have the spotlight. Well, it's been a long time coming. 5 years of putting in 80-hour weeks, but it finally paid off. The senior partners called me into the conference room last Thursday and made it official. I'm now a full partner at Henderson Myers & Associates. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Mom clapped her hands together. Harold? Didn't I tell you Kenneth would make partner before he turned 35? Dad beamed with pride. I always knew you had it in you, son. What's this mean for your salary? Kenneth launched into a detailed explanation of his new compensation package, his corner office, and his secretary. Beverly jumped in with questions about his cases, his future prospects, whether he might run for judge someday. I cut my pot roast into small pieces and chewed slowly, trying to look interested. And Beverly, Dad turned his attention to my sister. How's everything at the hospital? Still thinking about that fellowship in Boston? Actually, I have some exciting news too, Beverly said, practically glowing. Dr. Martinez offered me the position as department head. I'll be the youngest person ever to run pediatrics at General Hospital. The table erupted in congratulations. Mom jumped up to hug her, Dad raised his water glass in a toast, and Kenneth slapped her on the back like she'd just won the lottery. I clapped along, feeling like I was watching a movie about someone else's family. This calls for celebration, Dad announced. Doris, don't we have that bottle of champagne in the refrigerator? The good stuff, Mom agreed. Heading to the kitchen, I tried to swallow the bite of food in my mouth, but it felt like cardboard. This was exactly how every family dinner went. Kenneth and Beverly shared their triumphs while I sat there like a piece of furniture. Sometimes I wondered if they'd even notice if I stopped showing up. What about you, Janet? Beverly asked suddenly. Any exciting news from the restaurant? All eyes turned to me and I felt my cheeks flush. Well, actually, I was named Employee of the Month at Murphy's, and Emma made honor roll for the 3rd quarter in a row. Employee of the Month, Kenneth repeated slowly like he was trying to understand a foreign language. At the diner. That's nice, dear, Mom said, returning with the champagne. But she was already focused on popping the cork, the moment of attention on me evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. Speaking of Emma, Dad said, shouldn't she be focusing more on her studies instead of all these sleepovers? Education is what's going to separate her from... He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. From what? From ending up like me. The champagne flowed and the conversation turned to Beverly's house-hunting adventure. She and her husband were looking at properties in the wealthy part of town, places with 3-car garages and swimming pools. We're thinking about the Colonial on Maple Street, she said, scrolling through photos on her phone. It's a bit more than we wanted to spend, but Paul got that promotion, and with my new position we can swing it. Smart investment. Dad nodded approvingly. Real estate in that neighborhood only goes up. You kids know what you're doing. Beverly showed them pictures of granite countertops and walk-in closets, while I pushed food around my plate. The house she was considering cost more than I'd make in 10 years, even working both jobs. The best part is the school district, Beverly continued. Some of the highest test scores in the state. We want little Marcus to have every advantage. Education is everything, Kenneth agreed. Sandra and I are already looking at private schools for Tommy. You've got to start early if you want them to get into good colleges. Absolutely, Dad said, cutting another piece of roast. Look at how well you two turned out. Beverly, you'll be running that hospital someday. And Kenneth, I wouldn't be surprised if you end up in politics. They talked about their children's futures like they were mapping out battle plans. Piano lessons and soccer camps, tutoring, and test prep college funds that were already substantial. I thought about Emma's piggy bank in our tiny apartment, how she'd been saving her allowance money to buy herself a new backpack because she was embarrassed by the one I'd gotten her at the thrift store. Of course, some people make different choices, Dad continued, and I could feel his eyes on me. Some people think they know better than their parents. There it was. The dig I'd been expecting all evening. Dad had never forgiven me for turning down that scholarship even though I'd done it to take care of his mother. In his mind, I'd thrown away my future for no good reason. I made the choice I had to make, I said quietly, my fork trembling slightly in my hand. Did you, Dad's voice was sharp now, or did you take the easy way out? College is hard work, Janet. Maybe you just weren't up for the challenge. Kenneth and Beverly exchanged glances across the table. Mom suddenly became very interested in her green beans. This was the moment they all dreaded when Dad's disappointment in me bubbled to the surface and poisoned the whole evening. Taking care of Grandma Rose wasn't the easy way out. I said, my voice stronger now. Someone had to do it. There were other options, Dad replied. Nursing homes, professional care. You didn't have to sacrifice your education. With what money? The words came out sharper than I intended. Her Social Security barely covered her medications, let alone round-the-clock care. That's not the point. Dad waved his hand dismissively. The point is, you gave up. And now look where you are. 32 years old, working dead-end jobs, raising a child alone. Is that the life you wanted? The silence that followed was deafening. Beverly stared at her plate. Kenneth checked his phone and Mom got up to refill the water glasses that were already full. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, that familiar mix of shame and anger that always surfaced during these conversations. At least I take responsibility for my choices, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Dad's eyebrows shot up. Responsibility, Janet? You're barely keeping your head above water. You live in that tiny apartment, you work multiple jobs just to pay rent, and you can't even afford to send Emma to a decent school. How is that taking responsibility? Harold, Mom said softly, but he held up his hand to silence her. No, Doris. She needs to hear this. We've been tiptoeing around the truth for years, but maybe it's time someone said it out loud. My hands were shaking now, and I gripped my napkin tightly to try to stop them. Said what out loud? Dad leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes cold and calculating. This was the look he used to give me when I was a teenager when I disappointed him somehow. The look that made me feel like I was worth nothing. You're worthless in this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I heard Beverly gasp, saw Kenneth's head snap up from his phone, felt Mom's hand fly to her chest. But all I could focus on was Dad's face. The satisfaction I saw there, like he'd been waiting years to say those words out loud. Worthless. The word echoed in my head, bouncing around like a ping-pong ball. Worthless. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, everything I'd done for this family. Worthless. The dining room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel my face burning with humiliation and rage. Kenneth had finally put his phone down completely, his mouth slightly open. Beverly's eyes were wide with shock, and Mom looked like she might cry. But Dad just sat there cutting another piece of roast like he'd commented on the weather. Worthless. That's when the memories started flooding back. Not the warm, fuzzy family memories that were supposed to sustain you through hard times. These were different memories, the ones I'd been pushing down for years. I remembered being 19 years old sitting in Grandma Rose's hospital room while she recovered from pneumonia. The doctor explaining that she needed specialized care, that the facility costs would be astronomical. I remembered calling Dad from the hospital payphone asking if the family could help with the expenses. "We've got our own bills to worry about, Janet. You chose to take this on. Figure it out." So I did figure it out. I cashed in my college fund, all $18,000 that I'd saved from working summers and weekends throughout high school. Every penny went to Grandma Rose's care. I remembered being 21, working my first job at the diner when Dad called in a panic. He'd been diagnosed with a heart murmur and needed surgery, but their insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. Could I help? "Just a loan," he said. Just until he could figure things out. I'd given him $4,000, my entire savings account at the time. I'd been planning to use that money to go back to school to finish the degree I'd put on hold. But family comes first, right? That's what Dad always said. He never paid me back. I remembered being 23 when Mom's car broke down, and they couldn't afford the repairs. Another loan, another chunk of my savings gone. When Beverly needed money for medical school textbooks. Guess who covered the cost? When Kenneth's wife was pregnant and they were struggling to afford the baby furniture, who helped them out? Always me. And now Dad was sitting there in the house that I'd helped him keep when he couldn't make the mortgage payments 3 years ago, calling me worthless. The rage that had been building inside me for years suddenly reached a boiling point. I could feel it spreading through my body like fire, burning away the shame and self-doubt and fear that had kept me quiet for so long. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Everyone looked at me, probably expecting me to run to the bathroom and cry like I had when I was 12. But I wasn't 12 anymore, and I was done being their family scapegoat. "Worthless," I said, my voice steady, despite the tornado of emotions swirling inside me. "You think I'm worthless?" Dad looked annoyed, like I was interrupting his dinner. "Janet, sit down. Don't make a scene." No. The word came out stronger than I'd intended. "I'm done sitting down. I'm done being quiet while you tear me apart." I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them. Kenneth in his expensive suit, Beverly in her designer scrubs, Mom with her perfectly styled hair, Dad with his smug expression. They were all staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to know what's worthless, Dad? This conversation is worthless. This whole dynamic is worthless. But me, I'm the furthest thing from worthless, and I'm going to prove it to you right now." I turned to face him directly, looking him straight in the eyes for the first time in years. "Without me, you wouldn't have a roof over your head." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth and the color drained from his face. "What did you say?" "You heard me." I was gaining momentum now, years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. 3 years ago, when you couldn't make your mortgage payments because of your medical bills, who bailed you out? When the bank was threatening foreclosure, who wrote you a check for $8,000? Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mom's hand went to her throat. "That's different," he sputtered. "That was a loan." "Was it?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I never saw a penny of it back. Just like the $4,000 for your heart surgery. Just like the $3,000 for Mom's car. Just like the countless other times you've turned to worthless me when you needed money." Kenneth shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Janet, maybe you should calm down." "Calm down." I whirled around to face him. "You want me to calm down, Kenneth?" "Let me tell you about calm. I've been calm for 13 years while this family treated me like garbage. I've been calm while you all built your perfect lives on my sacrifices." Beverly tried to interrupt. "Now that's not fair." "Fair." I cut her off. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how I paid for your medical school textbooks, Beverly. Remember sophomore year when you called me crying because you couldn't afford the biochemistry books? Who covered that $600 bill? Beverly's face went pale. I offered to pay you back. Offered but never did. Just like Kenneth never paid me back for his bar exam fees. $1,500 so he could take that prep course. Money I'd saved up to move Emma and me into a better apartment. Kenneth looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I didn't know you needed it back. Didn't know I needed it back. My voice was rising now, years of frustration finally finding an outlet. I'm a single mother working 2 jobs, Kenneth. When exactly do you think I don't need money? Dad tried to regain control of the situation. That's enough, Janet. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. I turned back to him, and I could see something new in his eyes. Fear. For the first time in my life, my father looked afraid of me. You want dramatic. Let me tell you what's dramatic. Dramatic is working until 3 in the morning, cleaning office buildings, then getting up at 6 to take your daughter to school before your shift at the diner. Dramatic is choosing between groceries and Emma's school supplies because you spent your savings keeping your ungrateful family afloat. I started pacing around the dining room, my hands gesturing wildly as 13 years of suppressed emotion poured out of me. Do you want to know exactly how worthless I am, Dad? Let me break it down for you. In the last 10 years, I've given this family over $30,000. $30,000. I didn't have money I scraped together from tips and overtime and working holidays, while everyone else was enjoying their perfect lives. Mom made a small noise like a wounded animal. Janet, sweetie. Don't sweetie me, Mom. You sat there every time and watched him tear me apart. You never once stood up for me, never once told him he was wrong. You just let him make me feel like nothing while I was keeping your household financially stable. I stopped in front of the family photos on the sideboard, picking up the one from Kenneth's law school graduation. Look at this picture, Kenneth. Look how proud everyone is. Do you know where I was that day I was working a double shift at the diner? Because you needed money for your graduation party. The party I couldn't afford to attend. Kenneth's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. None of you ever asked. You just assumed worthless Janet would handle it just like I always do. Just like I handled Grandma Rose when she was dying. Just like I handled Dad's medical bills. Just like I handled every crisis this family has faced for the last 13 years. Beverly was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Janet, we didn't realize what? That I'm a human being with feelings, that I have dreams and goals and a daughter to take care of. Did you think I was just some kind of family ATM that you could use whenever you needed something? Dad finally found his voice, but it was shaky and uncertain. We never asked you to sacrifice so much. No, you never asked. You just expected it. And when I gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left, you called me worthless. I walked back to the table and leaned forward, my hands flat on the surface, staring directly into Dad's eyes. Well, here's a news flash for you, Harold Peterson. Without worthless me, you would have lost this house. Without worthless me, you wouldn't have been able to afford your surgery. Without worthless me, your precious golden children wouldn't have made it through school. I am the backbone of this family, and I'm done being invisible. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of family tension. This was the stunned silence of people who just had their entire worldview shattered. Dad's face had gone from red to white to gray. His hands were trembling as he reached for his water glass, but he seemed to have forgotten how to drink from it. Mom was openly crying now, her perfectly applied makeup ruined. Kenneth and Beverly sat frozen in their chairs like mannequins in a store window. I wasn't done. 13 years of being treated like the family failure had built up a reservoir of anger so deep I was just beginning to tap into it. You want to know what else is worthless, Dad? Your parenting. You raised Kenneth and Beverly to think they're better than everyone else, including their own sister. You taught them that love is conditional, that it depends on achievements and bank accounts and social status. I gestured toward my siblings. Look at them. Look at your perfect children. Kenneth makes 6 figures a year, but he's never once offered to help with Emma's school expenses. Beverly saves lives at the hospital, but she couldn't be bothered to visit me when I had pneumonia last winter. Kenneth tried to protest. I didn't know you were sick. Because you never call me unless you need something. When's the last time you asked how I'm doing? When's the last time either of you showed any interest in my life that didn't involve borrowing money? Beverly was sobbing now. We didn't mean to. We just thought. You thought what? That I was happy being the family charity case. That I enjoyed being the one everyone looked down on. I turned back to Dad, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. But you're the worst of all. You're supposed to be the father, the one who protects his children and builds them up. Instead, you've spent years tearing me down, making me feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm some kind of disappointment. Janet, he started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Do you know what Emma asked me last week? She asked me why Grandpa Harold doesn't like her mommy. An 8-year-old child can see what you've been doing to me, and you're too blind to notice. That hit home. I could see it in his face, the realization that his granddaughter had witnessed his treatment of me. For the first time since this conversation started, Dad looked genuinely ashamed. And Mom? I turned to face her. You're just as guilty. You've enabled this for years. Every time he put me down, every time he made me feel small, you just sat there and let it happen. You're supposed to be my mother, but you chose him over me every single time. Mom was crying so hard she could barely speak. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 13 years of my life. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done to my self-esteem. Sorry doesn't change the fact that my own family made me feel worthless. I straightened up, feeling taller than I had in years. Something had shifted inside me during this confrontation. The scared, apologetic girl who'd walked into this house an hour ago was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood her own worth. But here's what's going to change, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm done being the family's financial safety net. I'm done being the one you turn to when things get tough. I'm done pretending that this dysfunction is normal. Dad tried to regain some authority. Now see here, Janet. You can't just... I can and I will. I cut him off with a look that made him close his mouth immediately. From now on, I'm putting Emma first. Her college fund, her future, her happiness. No more loans that never get repaid. No more emergency bailouts. No more sacrificing my daughter's security for people who think I'm worthless. Kenneth found his voice. You can't be serious. Dead serious. I've been supporting this family financially and emotionally for over a decade, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect and dismissal. Well, that ends tonight. I walked over to the coat closet and pulled out my jacket. Emma and I are going to build our own life without constantly being made to feel like we're not good enough. We're going to find people who appreciate us, who value us, who see our worth. As I headed toward the front door, I heard chairs scraping against the floor behind me. They were all standing now, finally realizing that something fundamental had changed. Janet, wait! Mom called out, her voice desperate. Please don't leave like this. I turned around one last time, looking at the 4 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the truth I'd forced them to confront. I've been waiting for 13 years for you to treat me with respect, I said. I'm done waiting. And with that, I walked out of my childhood home, closing the door on more than just a building. I was closing the door on being invisible, on being taken for granted, on allowing other people to define my worth. 3 months later, my life looked completely different. I was sitting in my new apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a safe neighborhood with good schools, watching Emma do her homework at the kitchen table. The walls were painted bright yellow, her favorite color, and there were pictures everywhere, Emma's artwork, photos from our weekend adventures, certificates from her school achievements. The most important change wasn't the apartment, though. It was me. That night at my parents' house had been like breaking through a wall I didn't even know I'd built around myself. For years, I'd accepted their version of who I was. The family failure, the one who'd thrown away her potential, the one who couldn't get her life together. But standing up to Dad, finally saying everything I'd been holding inside, had shown me something crucial. I wasn't worthless. I never had been. The morning after the confrontation, I'd woken up feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't just relief from finally speaking my truth, though that was part of it. It was the sudden clarity about what I needed to do next. First, I'd had a conversation with my boss at Murphy's Diner. Sarah had always said I was one of her best employees, reliable and hardworking, good with customers. When I told her I was interested in taking on more responsibility, she offered me the assistant manager position on the spot. It came with a significant raise and health benefits for both Emma and me. Next, I'd looked at my finances with fresh eyes. Without the constant drain of family loans and emergency bailouts, I actually had money left over each month. For the first time in Emma's life, we had a real savings account. But the biggest change was in how I saw myself. Emma looked up from her math worksheet, pencil eraser pink from use. "Mom, can you help me with this problem?" "Of course, baby." I moved to sit beside her, looking at the fractions she was working on. "What part is giving you trouble?" "I don't understand how to add these together when they have different numbers on the bottom." I explained about finding common denominators, watching her face light up when she grasped the concept. This was my favorite part of every day, these quiet moments, when it was just the two of us figuring things out together. "Got it," she said, erasing and rewriting her answer. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "You seem happier lately. Like really happy. Not just pretending to be happy." Out of the mouths of babes. Psst. "You're very observant, Emma." "Yes, I think I am happier." "Is it because we don't go to Grandpa Harold's house anymore?" That question hit me right in the chest. I'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually. Emma was smart, and she'd noticed that our Sunday dinners had stopped abruptly. "That's part of it," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults have disagreements, and sometimes those disagreements mean we need to take a break from seeing each other." "Did he say something mean to you again?" "Again." My heart broke a little, realizing she'd been aware of the family dynamics all along. How many times had she watched her grandfather dismiss her mother? How many times had she seen me shrink into myself after those dinners? Yes, he did. But you know what? I stood up for myself this time. I told him he was wrong, and I made some decisions about what's best for our family. Emma nodded seriously. "Good. I didn't like how he made you sad." "I didn't like that either. But that's over now. From now on, we only spend time with people who treat us well." "Like Mrs. Garcia next door?" I smiled. Our neighbor Rosa Garcia was a widow in her 70s who'd taken an immediate liking to Emma. She'd been teaching her Spanish phrases and letting her help in her garden. In 3 months, Rosa had shown Emma more grandmotherly affection than my parents had in years. Exactly like Mrs. Garcia. Emma went back to her homework, and I returned to the kitchen to finish preparing dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs, but it was peaceful. No tension, no walking on eggshells, no waiting for someone to tear me down. My phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was from Kenneth. "Janet, can we talk? I've been thinking about what you said, and I think you were right about a lot of things. Would you be willing to meet for coffee?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it to keep the boundaries I'd established firm and clear. But another part of me, the part that still loved my brother despite everything, was curious about what he had to say. Over the past 3 months, I'd gotten several similar messages. Beverly had called twice, crying and apologizing. Mom had sent a long letter explaining how proud she was of me and how sorry she was for not standing up for me. Even Dad had tried to reach out, though his approach was more awkward than apologetic. I'd been polite but distant with all of them. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine, and I certainly wasn't ready to go back to the old dynamics. but I also wasn't sure I wanted to cut them out of my life completely. After dinner, once Emma was settled in front of the TV watching her favorite show, I called my therapist. Yes, I had a therapist now. Another positive change I'd made with my newfound financial stability. Dr. Patricia Williams was a warm, no-nonsense woman who specialized in family dynamics and codependency. She'd been helping me understand patterns I'd been trapped in for years. "How are you feeling about Kenneth's message?" she asked, after I'd filled her in on the latest contact attempts. "Confused, I guess. Part of me wants to hear what he has to say, but I'm afraid of getting sucked back into the old patterns. What would need to be different for you to feel safe having that conversation?" That was the key question. What would need to be different? I'd need to know that he understands what he did wrong. Not just a generic apology, but real understanding of how his behavior affected me. And I'd need to know that he's committed to changing, not just going back to the way things were. Those sound like reasonable boundaries. How would you know if he meets those criteria? We talked for another 40 minutes, working through my feelings and developing a plan for how to handle future contact from my family. By the end of the session, I felt clearer about what I needed. That night I texted Kenneth back. "I'm willing to meet, but I have some conditions. You come alone, we meet in a public place, and I need you to understand that this doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. If you can agree to that, we can talk." His response came within minutes. "Yes to all of that. Thank you for giving me a chance." We met at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, where I felt safe and in control. Kenneth was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He stood up when he saw me, and I was struck by how nervous he looked. "Thank you for coming," he said as we sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "But I guess I'm curious about what you have to say." Kenneth nodded, staring into his coffee like it might give him the right words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night, about what you said about how we've treated you, about everything. And you were right, about all of it." He looked up at me, and I could see genuine remorse in his eyes. "I've been going over memories, trying to see things from your perspective, and I'm horrified by what I found." I waited, not making it easy for him. This conversation was his idea, his responsibility. "I remembered when you paid for my bar exam prep course. At the time, I just thought of it as Janet being helpful like always. I never considered that you might need that money for yourself and Emma. I never even asked if you could afford it." "I couldn't afford it," I said quietly. "Emma and I ate ramen noodles for 2 weeks so I could give you that money." Kenneth closed his eyes, pain evident on his face. "God, Janet, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "You didn't want to have any idea. It was easier to think of me as the family helper than to acknowledge that I was sacrificing things I needed." "You're right. And it wasn't just the money, was it? It was everything. The way Dad talked to you, the way we all just accepted that you were the one who would handle things when they got difficult. I could see that he was genuinely trying to understand, which was more than I'd expected. It wasn't just that you accepted it, Kenneth. You participated in it. You looked down on me just as much as Dad did." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I convinced myself that you'd made your choices, that you were happy with your life. But the truth is, I felt superior to you, and that made me feel better about myself." At least he was being honest. "So what changed? Why are you here now?" Kenneth was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "Sandra and I had a fight about a week after that dinner. She said some things that made me realize how much I'd turned into Dad. The way I talk about people, the way I judge them based on their success or lack thereof." He paused, then continued. "She pointed out that I've never once asked about your life, never shown interest in Emma beyond superficial pleasantries. She made me see that I've been treating my own sister like she's invisible. She's right. I know she is. And Janet, I want to change that. I want to be a better brother, a better uncle to Emma. but I don't know how to fix this." I studied his face looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was a man who'd been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. "You can't fix it," I said finally. "Not all at once, anyway. The damage didn't happen overnight, and healing won't happen overnight either. So where do we start?" "We start with you understanding that I'm not the same person who walked out of that house 3 months ago. I'm not going to go back to being the family doormat. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine just to keep the peace." Kenneth nodded. "I wouldn't want you to. You shouldn't have had to put up with that for as long as you did. The other thing you need to understand is that Emma comes first now. Always. My decisions are based on what's best for her, not what's convenient for the rest of the family. As it should be." We talked for another hour, and while it wasn't a magical reconciliation, it felt like the beginning of something different. Kenneth shared some of his own struggles, his realization that his marriage had been suffering because of his workaholic tendencies and his tendency to judge people by their achievements. When we finally parted ways, he asked if he could meet Emma sometime. "Maybe," I said, "but it has to be on my terms, and it has to be about getting to know her as a person, not just going through the motions of being an uncle." "I'd like that. I'd really like to get to know my niece." Over the following weeks, Kenneth followed through on his promises. He called regularly not to ask for anything, but just to check in. He sent Emma a birthday card with a thoughtful gift. He even offered to help with her school project about family trees, approaching it with genuine interest rather than obligation. Beverly took longer to come around, but eventually we had our own coffee shop conversation. Hers was messier, full of tears and self-recrimination, but equally sincere. She admitted that she'd always been jealous of my relationship with Grandma Rose, and that jealousy had made it easier to dismiss my sacrifices. Mom's attempts at reconciliation were the most complicated. She wanted forgiveness without accountability, healing without acknowledging the depth of the wounds. We were still working through that relationship with Dr. Williams' help. And Dad. Dad was the holdout. He'd made a few awkward attempts to reach out, but they all felt performative, like he was going through the motions because Mom had pressured him. He still hadn't genuinely apologized or acknowledged how his words had affected me. That was okay. I'd learned that I didn't need his approval or validation to know my worth. I'd spent too many years waiting for Harold Peterson to see me as valuable, not realizing that the only person whose opinion of me truly mattered was my own. 6 months after that explosive Sunday dinner, Emma and I were hosting our first Thanksgiving in our new apartment. Not a big production, just the two of us and Rosa Garcia from next door, along with Kenneth and his family. Beverly was working at the hospital, but she'd stopped by earlier with homemade pumpkin bread and a promise to visit the next day. I stood in my kitchen basting the turkey and listening to the sounds of laughter from the living room. Emma was showing her cousin Tommy her rock collection, while Kenneth and Rosa discussed gardening techniques. It was peaceful, warm, and real in a way that family gatherings had never been before. My phone rang, and I saw Dad's name on the caller ID. I'd been expecting this call. The holidays had a way of making people sentimental, and I knew he'd been struggling with our estrangement. "Hi, Dad." "Janet." His voice was uncertain, older somehow. "I was wondering, that is, your mother and I were hoping. We'd like to see you and Emma for Thanksgiving." I looked through the doorway at Emma, who was explaining the difference between sedimentary and igneous rocks to a captivated audience. She was confident, happy, surrounded by people who appreciated her curiosity and intelligence. "We already have plans, Dad." "Oh." The disappointment in his voice was palpable. "Maybe Christmas, then." "Maybe. We'll see." There was a long pause. "Janet, I know I said some things that night that I shouldn't have said. You called me worthless, Dad, in front of the whole family. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Whether you meant it or not, you said it. And more importantly, you believed it. That wasn't the first time you'd made me feel like I didn't matter. I'm sorry." The words were there, but they felt empty. Not because he was lying, but because he still didn't understand what he was apologizing for. I know you are, but sorry isn't enough anymore. Sorry doesn't undo 13 years of making me feel small. Sorry doesn't give me back my self-esteem or my confidence or my sense of belonging in my own family. Then what do you want from me? His voice was getting sharper, more defensive. I said I was sorry. What else can I do? And there it was. The same attitude that had gotten us here in the first place. He wanted a quick fix, a simple apology that would magically restore everything to the way it was. He wanted forgiveness without change, reconciliation without growth. I want you to understand why what you said was so devastating. I want you to acknowledge all the ways you've undermined me over the years. I want you to recognize how much I've contributed to this family and how little credit I've gotten for it. I can't change the past, Janet. No, you can't. But you can commit to doing better in the future. You can commit to treating me with respect, to valuing what I bring to the family, to supporting me instead of tearing me down. Of course I can do that. But his tone suggested he thought I was being unreasonable, asking for too much. He still didn't get it. Dad, let me ask you something. When Kenneth made partner at his firm, how did that make you feel? Proud, obviously. He'd worked hard for it. And when Beverly got promoted to department head, the same. Proud. She deserved it. And when I got promoted to assistant manager at the diner, when I told you I'd been named employee of the month, silence. You dismissed it. You treated it like it didn't matter, like it wasn't a real achievement. Do you see the difference? More silence. I've been working just as hard as Kenneth and Beverly Dad. Maybe harder because I've been doing it while raising a child alone and supporting this family financially. But you never saw that as worthy of pride or respect. It's different. Different how you could have done more with your life if you'd made different choices. And there it was again. The fundamental belief that my choices made me less valuable, less worthy of respect and love. Goodbye, Dad. Janet. Wait. I hung up the phone and turned back to my turkey, taking a deep breath to center myself. Through the doorway, I could hear Emma explaining tectonic plates to Kenneth, who was asking intelligent follow-up questions and treating her 8-year-old theories with genuine respect. This was my family now. People who saw Emma's worth, who valued her curiosity and intelligence. People who saw my worth, who appreciated my hard work and dedication. People who understood that love isn't conditional on achievement or social status. Rosa appeared in the kitchen doorway, her wise eyes taking in my expression. Everything okay, mija? Everything's perfect, I said, and I meant it. 20 minutes later, we were all seated around my small dining table, sharing a meal I'd prepared in my own home, surrounded by people who chose to be there. Emma said grace, thanking God for family and friends and second chances. Kenneth raised his glass of apple cider in a toast to new beginnings. As I looked around the table at these faces, I realized something profound. I'd spent so many years believing that family was something you were stuck with, something you had to endure regardless of how they treated you. But I'd learned that real family, the kind that matters, is made up of people who see your value and celebrate it. I'd also learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes you. Sometimes standing up for yourself is an act of love, not just for yourself, but for the people watching you. Emma had seen me find my voice, set boundaries, and demand respect. Those were lessons that would serve her well throughout her life. The girl who'd walked into her parents' house 6 months ago, hoping for crumbs of approval and acceptance, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who surrounded herself with people who appreciated her, who was raising her daughter to expect nothing less than respect and kindness. During dessert, Emma looked up at me with chocolate on her chin and said, "Mom, this is the best Thanksgiving ever." I wiped the chocolate away with my napkin and smiled. "You know what, baby, I think you're absolutely right." Later that evening, after Kenneth and his family had gone home, and Rosa had returned to her apartment, and Emma was fast asleep in her bed, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The confrontation with my father had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had forced me to see patterns I'd been blind to recognize my own worth in a way I never had before. It had given me the courage to change my life to prioritize my daughter's well-being over other people's expectations. Most importantly, it had taught me that speaking your truth, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts, even when it changes, everything is one of the most powerful things you can do. I'd walked into that Sunday dinner feeling worthless, and I'd walked out knowing I was anything but. That knowledge had transformed not just my relationship with my family, but my relationship with myself. And that transformation was worth everything. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Dad earlier that evening. It made me sad that he still couldn't see past his own limitations, but it didn't devastate me the way it would have 6 months ago. His inability to value me was his loss, not a reflection of my worth. Tomorrow was a new day full of possibilities. Emma and I were building a life based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared dreams. We were surrounded by people who saw us clearly and loved us completely. We were free from this burden of trying to earn love that should have been given freely. That night I fell asleep feeling grateful. Grateful for the courage to speak my truth. Grateful for the strength to change my life. And grateful for the wisdom to know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to settle for less than you deserve. I hope that if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, you'll find that same courage. You deserve to be valued, respected, and loved for exactly who you are. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't value your contributions? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with people you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your worth and speaking your truth. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have the courage to demand the respect you deserve.